Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into something I find absolutely fascinating: how writers and creators manage to craft absolute, paralyzing terror using just a handful of carefully chosen words. We usually think of horror as needing these elaborate monsters, right? Tons of jump scares or massive special effects budgets. But the material we're digging into today proves that the absolute best scares often rely on extreme minimalism. In fact, psychologists will tell you our brains are literally hardwired to be way more terrified of what we cannot see than what we actually can. So, we're going to break down the anatomy of dread and see exactly how the architecture of fear is built, right there in the theater of your own mind. We're actually going to skip the usual agenda today so we can drop right into this incredible piece of microfiction. Just listen to this single sentence. When Ion asked why, the villagers exchanged frightened glances. In literally 10 words, an entire terrifying world is established. We don't know who Ion is, we don't know where this village is, and crucially, we have zero idea what the context of the question even is. But that reaction, those frightened glances, it tells us absolutely everything we need to know about the stakes. So here's the crucial question. What makes asking a simple question so incredibly terrifying? Well, this is the core mystery we'll be exploring throughout this explainer. The secret sauce here is deliberately withholding information. By totally refusing to give us the monster or the threat or even the basic context, the creator is basically forcing the audience's mind to step up and construct its very own nightmares. Our brains absolutely hate a vacuum. So when we see a reaction of extreme fear, but we're denied the actual cause of that fear, our imagination instantly rushes in to fill that void with whatever scares us the most personally. To see exactly how this vacuum of information is built, let's shift gears and examine the environmental setup of a digital horror fragment called Echoes from the Blue Glow. Now, while our first example leaned into social dynamics, this one plunges us straight into modern technological isolation. It is a total masterclass in setting a mood before anything actually happens. The scene opens at night, specifically 2:13 a.m. And look, that specific timestamp, it is not just some random number pulled out of thin air. It's a vital psychological tool. Biologically speaking, at 2 a.m., our circadian rhythms are at their absolute lowest point. It makes us physically and mentally vulnerable. It's what a lot of people call the witching hour, right? That time when logic kind of fades away and the more primal, fearful parts of our brains start taking over. By starting us right here, the text instantly disarms us, anchoring us in a state of deep, deep night isolation. What's really fascinating here are the visual isolation mechanics at play. The text isolates our character, Ollie, making him sit on his bed in a dark room, lit entirely by the cold, artificial illumination of his phone. It creates this tiny, highly vulnerable bubble of light. And what's lying just past that blue glow? Well, the prompt specifically tells us the room is messy and shadowy. That messiness is totally key. It triggers this phenomenon called pareidolia. That's when our brains desperately try to find familiar patterns, like faces or crouching figures in random shapes. In the dark, a pile of clothes suddenly becomes a threat. An open closet door turns into a gaping maw. The shadows are actively encroaching on his safe zone. Okay, so once this incredibly tense visual trap is set, the creator doesn't just throw a monster into the room. That would be too easy. Instead, the text introduces an audio-driven disruption to completely shatter the quiet. That visual isolation is suddenly, sharply pierced by a digital intrusion. It proves that even in a locked room in the dead of night, you are never truly disconnected from the outside world, or whatever might be using it to reach you. And this right here brilliantly illustrates that intrusion. It's just a simple notification, Hamza voice message. This seemingly mundane little alert acts as an ominous catalyst. It instantly shifts the whole vibe of the scene from passive isolation into active dread. Because think about it, why is a voice message at 2:13 a.m. so terrifying? Because it totally breaks the social contract. People don't just send casual voice messages at 2 in the morning unless there is a massive emergency or unless something is terribly, terribly wrong. The ordinary, everyday medium of a smartphone notification just became a vessel for terror. By breaking the scene down into these specific steps, we can see this highly clinical escalation of tension. First, it establishes that midnight environmental mood and the restrictive light. Then, it rapidly introduces an incoming digital threat, follows it up with an unbearable, eerie silence, and finally culminates in a physical anomaly. It moves incredibly fast. You go from feeling alone to realizing you're being contacted to the sudden, horrifying realization that the actual environment around you is changing. Let's just hone in on that sudden quiet for a second. Tense, eerie silence. By explicitly noting this in the prompt, the text essentially forces the audience to strain their own ears. When you read or hear the word silence in a horror context, you almost stop breathing for a second, don't you? You start listening to your own surroundings. The creator is making you completely complicit in Ollie's growing anxiety and confusion. The mere absence of sound becomes this heavy, oppressive force in the room. Which brings us to our next big question. How exactly does the scene direct our eyes toward the intangible and the unexplainable? Like, how do you visualize something that isn't actually there? Well, the source text gives us these specific image prompts that act almost like a director's shot list, expertly guiding exactly where our attention and our fear should be focused. These precise image prompts act exactly like a camera lens. First, we zoom right in on Allie's terrified reaction. We see the close-up of his shocked face. We see his eyes reflecting the screen's ominous tone. This is huge because it relies on mirror neurons in our own brains. We are biologically wired to feel the fear through him before we even know what on earth he's looking at. Then the camera pans back out to the environment, noting a subtle shadow distortion. The physical room is quite literally bending around him in response to this digital message. So, we've got to ask, what is hiding in that shadow distortion? The absolute genius of this is that the text never actually shows us a monster. It doesn't describe a ghost or a demon or a home invader. It only shows us a subtle distortion in the darkness, forcing our brains to step up and fill in the blanks with the absolute most terrifying shape we can conjure up. Because the unseen threat is always, universally, scarier than the revealed monster. But here's the thing. This psychological trick isn't just limited to being alone in the dark. It works just as well in a crowded room. If Ollie's story is about the sheer terror of being totally alone, this next concept is all about the terror of being in a group. Let's look at the contagion of fear. It's such a fascinating dichotomy when you put them side by side. On one hand, we have this isolated digital fear. Allie trapped in his messy bedroom, illuminated only by that singular phone glow, facing some unseen threat channeled through his tech. It's incredibly solitary. But then on the other side, we have this collective analog fear. Ayan and the villagers are instantly bound together by a shared, unspoken dread in a social setting. Allie's fear is completely localized to his room, while the villagers' fear operates almost like an ancient social virus. It spreads instantly through mere eye contact. So we really have to ask ourselves, why do the villagers fear the simple word why? The withholding of information here is just brilliant. We have absolutely no clue what the actual threat to the village is. Is it a creature in the woods, an oppressive regime, a generational curse? We don't know. We only know that even acknowledging the situation, even daring to ask a basic question about it, is incredibly dangerous. The golden rule of this world is that ignorance is your only way to stay safe. It's the ultimate, terrifying version of the elephant in the room. Everyone knows it's there, but acknowledging it will get you killed. And honestly, this brings us perfectly to the unifying theory of this whole explainer. Whether it's a subtle distortion of shadows in a teenager's bedroom at 2:13 a.m., or the frightened glances of villagers absolutely refusing to answer a basic question, both of these disparate fragments ultimately rely on the exact same psychological trick. As the text from our digital horror scene puts it, it is all about hinting at something unseen. The true, bone-chilling horror always lies in what is left unsaid, unshown, and unrevealed. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to consider how these minimal cues tap into your very own anxieties. Which of these fears actually grips you tighter? Is it the isolated, paranoid glow of a screen in the dark, knowing you are completely alone? Or is it the shared, unspoken terror in the eyes of a crowd, knowing everyone around you is terrified, but no one will speak a word about it? Think about what kind of dread you would write into those shadows. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the architecture of fear. Until next time, keep exploring the unseen.